It is said that some endings arrive without noise. The chapter opens at the edge of dawn, where night loosens its hold but does not fully depart. A stone gate stands alone in the desert, half veiled in drifting mist. Its doors are closed, not shattered. The hinges are intact. The lintel remains unbroken. There are no scorch marks on the stone, no fallen towers nearby, no signs of struggle or retreat, only stillness. The opening question drifts softly, like breath across cool air. How does a kingdom end without being conquered? In forgotten corners of the earth, people once believed that collapse required force, that walls must fall, that fire must mark the moment of disappearance. But this place tells a quieter story. Here, nothing was taken, nothing was burned, nothing was broken. The gate was simply closed. Beneath the silence, the stone feels deliberate. The doors meet cleanly, as if aligned with care. Dust gathers at the threshold, undisturbed by footsteps that never arrive. The gate does not resist. It does not warn. It does not invite. It rests. The narrative focus settles on this moment, not as an instant of panic or defeat, but as an act of choice. Legends whispered by distant caravans speak of a night when the moon stood high and full, when bells were left unrung, and watchtowers stood unmanned. Fires were allowed to fade. Doors were shut gently, one by one. No alarm sounded. Some believed the people of the kingdom understood the weight of noise. They had seen how loud endings echoed through generations, how wars left scars not only on land, but on memory. They chose a different path. They chose withdrawal over resistance, quiet over spectacle. Where memory fades, intention can remain. Stone walls throughout the city were left standing, upright and complete, yet emptied of purpose. Streets were swept. Tools were laid down carefully. Nothing was smashed in anger. Nothing was abandoned in haste. It was as if the kingdom exhaled and did not inhale again. Emotion begins to move gently from curiosity into reverent melancholy. The listener senses that this silence was not born of fear, but of knowing, as if the people had seen something approaching, not an army, but a change in the world's rhythm. Perhaps the outside had grown too fast, too loud, too certain of its right to enter everything. The gate became a boundary not against enemies, but against noise. Whispers tell us that those who stood before the gate on that final night did not weep. There were no hurried goodbyes, no cries of regret, only the soft acknowledgement that the kingdom had said all it needed to say. Survival, perhaps, was never the goal. Some myths suggest the people did not vanish all at once. They dissolved slowly, quietly, into surrounding lands. Others say the city beyond the gate remains intact, preserved in stillness, waiting for a world capable of approaching without demand. The truth rests somewhere between. Standing before the gate now, one feels no urge to open it. There is no curiosity sharp enough to break the calm. The doors do not challenge you. They do not test your resolve. They simply exist, complete in their closure. Emotion deepens into acceptance. The listener senses that this gate is not guarding treasure, nor knowledge, nor power. It guards completion. Beyond it lies not absence, but rest. The stars return overhead as night deepens again. Moonlight traces the edges of the stone, revealing symbols worn smooth by time, spirals, arcs, faint echoes of meaning, now released. The gate does not glow. It does not respond. It remains. Perhaps this is what the kingdom understood, that some endings are not failures, but fulfillments, that to remain open forever is not strength, that choosing when to close can be an act of wisdom. The world beyond continued. Empires rose and fell. Maps were redrawn. Noise multiplied. But the gate did not reopen. It did not need to. The chapter draws toward its close beneath starlight. The mist thins. The desert breathes softly. The gate stands exactly as it did at dawn, unchanged, untroubled. Nothing asks to be opened. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some doors close not to keep the world out, but to let silence finally settle in. As sleep approaches, let the image remain with you. A gate that chose quiet, a kingdom that stepped gently away, and a silence so complete it feels like peace.
It is said that places remember us long after we stop returning. The chapter opens beneath a pale moon, where streets unfold gently through an empty city. The stone beneath them is smooth, worn not by erosion, but by countless footsteps that once passed in quiet rhythm. No debris blocks the way, no walls have fallen inward. The paths remain clear, open and inviting, and yet no one walks them. The opening question drifts softly through the still air. What happens to a city built for movement, when movement ceases? In forgotten corners of the earth, streets were never merely functional. They were expressions of belief. They guided not just bodies, but breath. In this vanished kingdom, roads did not rush toward markets or fortresses. They curved gently, aligning with moonrise, seasonal light, and shared ritual. Nothing here was random. The narrative focus settles on the streets themselves, paths once worn smooth by daily processions, evening gatherings, and silent walks beneath the stars. People moved together here.
slowly, deliberately, as if each step mattered. The city breathed through its streets. When the kingdom withdrew, the streets were left exactly as they were. No barricades were raised, no exit sealed. The roads remained open, waiting for footsteps that never returned. Emotion drifts from curiosity into soft melancholy. The listener senses the ache of absence, not abrupt loss, but gradual quiet. The stones seem patient, as if still expecting movement, still remembering the weight of feet. Whispers tell us that travelers who wandered these streets long after the disappearance felt strangely guided. Without signs or raps, they sensed direction, an inclination to turn here, to pause there. Some said the streets remembered the flow of life, subtly offering it to those who listened. Scholars later dismissed these accounts as illusion. Geometry, they said, coincidence. But the stones remain angled, gently persuasive, unarguing. Where memory fades, habit can linger. The chapter deepens into reflection. Streets are among the last things to die in a city. They endure even when buildings collapse. They hold patterns of movement long after purpose dissolves. Here, the streets do not crumble. They do not protest abandonment. They simply exist, quiet witnesses to a rhythm that ended without ceremony. Emotion settles into reverent sadness. The listener senses a world that once moved together, now stilled. A shared direction replaced by openness. No one is lost here, because no one is walking. Standing in the middle of an intersection beneath moonlight, one feels neither fear nor urgency. There is no wrong turn. The streets do not demand destination. Perhaps that was the lesson they were always meant to teach. As night deepens, mist gathers low along the paving stones. Moonlight glides across the ground, revealing subtle patterns, spirals embedded in stone, gentle curves leading toward spaces now forgotten. The city does not collapse inward. It does not call out. It allows itself to be left. By dawn, the streets appear ordinary. The magic thins. The stones lose their glow. In daylight, the paths seem like any other ruins, quiet, unremarkable. But night will return, and when it does, the streets will remember again. The chapter closes beneath the fading moon. No footsteps arrive. No doors open. The roads stretch on, open and unclaimed. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some paths exist not to lead us forward, but to remind us how it once felt to move together, slowly, without hurry. As sleep approaches, imagine those streets beneath the moon, waiting without expectation, holding direction without demand, patient in their silence, remembering every step that no longer needs to return.
It is said that power knows when to loosen its grip. The chapter opens inside a vast stone chamber, where sound seems unwilling to linger. At its center rests a throne, unbroken, unmoved, untouched. Moonlight enters from above, falling gently across the seat before dissolving into shadow. No banners hang from the walls. No guards stand watch. There are no signs of struggle or abandonment, only absence. The opening question settles softly into the still air. Can authority choose to end? In forgotten corners of the earth, thrones were not always symbols of dominance. In this vanished kingdom, the throne was understood as a place of listening rather than command. It was occupied briefly, never possessed. To sit upon it was not to rule, but to hold responsibility lightly. The narrative focus rests on this restraint. Leaders were said to arrive without ceremony, sit in silence, and leave without announcement. Decisions were shaped elsewhere, in council, in shared breath, in quiet agreement. The throne merely witnessed what had already been understood. When the kingdom withdrew, no final ruler remained behind. The throne was not contested, it was not destroyed, it was simply left alone. Emotion drifts from curiosity into calm reverence. The listener senses a culture that understood the danger of permanence in power. To cling too tightly to authority was believed to distort it. Endings, like beginnings, required intention. Whispers tell us that on the final night, the throne chamber was entered one last time. No crown was placed upon the seat. No declaration echoed through the hall. The space was acknowledged and released. Where memory fades, dignity can remain. The throne's carvings tell no stories of conquest. They depict cycles, spirals, returning lines, symbols of rise and release. Power here was understood as temporary, a current rather than a possession. Standing before the throne now, one feels no urge to sit. The seat does not invite ambition. It does not promise control. It offers only the weight of responsibility and the relief of setting it down. Emotion settles into quiet acceptance. The listener senses something rare, authority that knew when to step away, a structure that did not demand continuation for its own sake. The world beyond the chamber moved on. New rulers rose elsewhere. Louder thrones demanded attention. This one remained silent, and in that silence it kept its integrity. The chapter deepens into reflection. Perhaps this was the kingdom's greatest act, not its rise, but its refusal to cling, not its governance, but its release. The throne does not mourn its emptiness, it does not wait. It has completed its role. As night deepens, stars appear through the opening above, drifting slowly across the sky. The throne remains still, unconcerned with being witnessed. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen,
and some seats of power matter most when no one sits upon them. The chapter closes with moonlight thinning, shadow softening, and the throne resting exactly as it has for generations, unclaimed, unmissed, and whole. As sleep approaches, let that image remain, a throne that refused a king, a power that knew when to end, and a silence strong enough to hold authority without needing to speak.
It is said that the sacred does not vanish, it withdraws. The chapter opens inside a stone chamber, where even light moves carefully. A temple stands intact, its pillars upright, its walls unbroken. There is no sign of desecration here, no shattered altars, no ash. Only a quiet so complete, it feels deliberate. A thin ribbon of dusklight enters through a narrow opening high above, gliding across the floor before resting briefly on the altar. The opening question arrives softly, almost as a whisper. What happens to faith when a people disappear? In forgotten corners of the earth, temples were not built to impress. They were built to listen. This one was shaped like a chamber of breath, walls curved gently inward, ceilings angled to soften sound. Voices here were never meant to rise. Even prayer was offered quietly. The narrative focus settles on this understanding. Rituals in the vanished kingdom were shaped by restraint. Light entered only at certain hours. Movement was slow. Silence was considered the highest offering. To speak loudly was to misunderstand the space. When the kingdom withdrew, the temple did not resist. It did not cry out. It simply lowered its voice further. Whispers tell us that on the final days, priests did not perform closing rites. There were no grand ceremonies. The sacred was not shut down. It was allowed to sleep. Doors were eased partway closed. Fires were left to fade naturally. Nothing was taken away. Emotion moves from curiosity into inward calm. The listener senses comfort rather than loss, as if faith itself chose rest. The sacred did not demand continuation for its own sake. Where memory fades, reverence can remain. The altar bears no final inscription, no warning, no prophecy. Its surface is smooth, shaped by countless hands that once rested there in silence. It does not feel abandoned. It feels complete. Standing within the chamber, one feels no urgency to pray, no obligation to perform. The space does not ask for belief. It offers stillness. Perhaps this was the temple's final teaching, that faith does not require constant expression to survive, that silence can be a form of devotion deeper than words. As night deepens, the last light withdraws from the altar. Stars appear briefly through the opening above, then drift away. The chamber grows darker, quieter. Emotion settles into peace. The listener senses that nothing sacred has been lost. It has simply retreated from noise. The world beyond grew louder. Faith elsewhere demanded proclamation. This temple remained content with quiet. The chapter closes in darkness, not empty, but full. The temple rests beneath dust and time, its voice lowered to a murmur so soft it feels like breath. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some prayers are answered by being allowed to end. As sleep approaches, let the image remain. A temple intact and unbroken, holding its silence gently, faith resting rather than fading, a sacred space that learned when to grow quiet. It is said that water remembers every place it has been. The chapter opens beneath a sky scattered with quiet stars. In the center of an empty courtyard rests a stone fountain. Its basin is dry, its surface unbroken, its edges worn smooth by centuries of touch. No cracks mark its walls. No signs of desperation remain. It does not look abandoned. It looks rested. The opening question drifts softly, like a ripple that never reaches shore. How did a kingdom thrive where water now sleeps? In forgotten corners of the earth, water was not something to be conquered. It was listened for. The people of this vanished kingdom believed water had its own breath, its own will. They learned to follow its quiet signals, the coolness beneath stone, the way roots curved, the subtle change in air that suggested depth. The narrative focus settles on this relationship. Channels were carved patiently, not to force water forward, but to invite it gently. Wells were sunk slowly, stopping often to listen. Reservoirs were shaped like bowls of rest, allowing water to gather without confinement. Here, water was never rushed. Emotion moves from curiosity into quiet admiration. The listener senses a patience now rare, a trust in cycles longer than a lifetime. Water arrived when it was ready. When it withdrew, it was allowed to go. As myth and memory begin to blur, whispers tell us that the water was believed to be alive, not sacred in a dramatic sense, but responsive. It remained where gratitude was shown. It retreated from greed. Stories suggest that when the kingdom began to withdraw, the water followed. It did not dry up, it hid.
Where memory fades, life can remain unseen. The wells did not collapse. The channels were not blocked. The water simply sank deeper, slipping beyond reach, carrying with it the echo of voices, the memory of hands lowering cups in silence. Emotion deepens into gentle sorrow. The listener senses loss, not of water, but of relationship, of the ability to wait, to listen, to trust what cannot be controlled. Standing beside a well now, one hears nothing at first. Then, if listening long enough, a faint echo returns, depth answering depth. The water is still there. It has not left the land. It has only stepped away from surface life. Perhaps this was a final act of care, to hide rather than disappear, to remain intact, untouched by noise. The chapter drifts into reflection. Modern eyes see dry stone and call it failure. Ancient eyes might have seen restraint. As night deepens, mist rises gently from unseen depths, like breath returning to air. The courtyard cools. The fountain holds its shape, remembering flow without demanding it. Emotion settles into peace. The listener feels the kindness in allowing water to sleep, and not forcing life to perform endlessly. The world beyond moved on. Rivers elsewhere were dammed, wells were drained, water was demanded. Here, it was released. The chapter closes beside the empty fountain, beneath stars. Nothing moves on the surface, everything remains below. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some waters remain pure only when they are allowed to hide. As sleep approaches, imagine that water resting beneath the stone, cool, unhurried, intact, holding memory in its depths, waiting not to return, but to remain.
It is said that forgetting can be an act of care. The chapter opens within a chamber where dust drifts slowly through still air. The walls are stone, smooth and upright. Shelves line the space, empty but undamaged, their shapes intact. There is no ash here, no scent of fire. Nothing suggests destruction, only absence. The opening question arrives softly, like a thought that does not insist on being answered. What knowledge disappears first when a kingdom chooses silence? In forgotten corners of the earth, libraries were not always monuments to power. This one was never meant to impress. It did not store the deeds of kings or the outcomes of wars. It held quieter things, patterns of weather, songs remembered by rhythm rather than words, rituals meant to be practiced and then released. Knowledge here was not owned, it was carried. The narrative focus settles on this philosophy. The people of the vanished kingdom believed that some understanding lost its gentleness when written down too firmly. Ink fixed what should remain fluid. Words could be repeated without context. Wisdom could be extracted from the breath that gave it meaning. So this library chose a different path. Whispers tell us that its contents were never permanent. Scrolls were copied by memory, then allowed to fade. Songs were sung until they lived in the body, then left unrecorded. Nothing here was meant to survive unchanged. Emotion moves from curiosity into tenderness. The listener senses care rather than fear behind the absence. The library did not vanish because it was dangerous. It vanished because it was fragile. Where memory fades, kindness can remain. As the kingdom began to withdraw, the library was not emptied in haste. There was no urgency. Shelves were cleared gently. Tablets were buried, not broken. Doors were closed without seals, as if trusting that forgetting would do the rest. The space was left intact so that silence could finish the work. Standing within the chamber now, one feels no loss. The emptiness does not ache, it rests. The walls seem to breathe, holding echoes that do not demand voice. Perhaps this was the truest form of preservation, not freezing knowledge in time, but allowing it to dissolve naturally, like breath returning to air. The chapter deepens into reflection. Modern histories fear forgetting. They equate memory with survival. But this library understood something quieter, that wisdom forced to endure can harden, and what hardens can harm. Emotion settles into calm acceptance. The listener feels invited to release the need to know everything, to carry less, to trust that not all understanding must be retained to have mattered. The world beyond demanded records. This place chose restraint. Dust continues to gather. Stone remains cool. Silence holds the space gently. The chapter closes without titles, without texts, without explanation. The library does not ask to be rediscovered. It has completed its purpose. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some knowledge remains whole only when it is allowed to fade. As sleep approaches, imagine that chamber beneath the earth, empty, intact, and kind, holding nothing, and therefore lacking nothing at all. It is said that vigilance is a habit, not a necessity. The chapter opens at the edge of dawn. A watchtower rises from the land, its stone pale and cool, its silhouette clear against a quiet horizon. The steps leading upward are worn smooth, shaped by generations of sentries who once climbed them at first light. Today, no one ascends. The opening question arrives gently,
like a thought allowed to pass without answer. What happens when a kingdom decides it no longer needs to watch? In forgotten corners of the earth, watchtowers were symbols of readiness. Eyes turned outward, fires prepared, horizons scanned for change. To look away was once considered danger, but this kingdom learned otherwise. The narrative focus settles on a single morning, the day the horizon went unwatched. No command was given, no decree announced the end of vigilance. The guards simply did not arrive. Signal fires remained unlit. The tower stood as it always had, only quieter. There was no threat that morning, no approaching dust, no distant movement. The sky held its usual calm, and for the first time, no one felt compelled to measure it. Emotion moves from curiosity into quiet understanding. The listener senses that this choice was not neglect, but completion. The kingdom had spent centuries preparing for what might come. When nothing did, they learned to release the posture of waiting. Where memory fades, trust can begin. Whispers tell us that the people believed constant watching shaped the world into something hostile, that expecting danger invited it. To stop watching was to declare peace, not with enemies, but with uncertainty itself. The watchtowers were left standing. They were not dismantled. They were simply allowed to rest. Stone steps cooled, railings gathered dust. The towers became part of the landscape again, rather than instruments of alert. Emotion deepens into calm acceptance. The listener senses relief in the idea of standing down, not out of weakness, but out of confidence. The horizon did not need to be controlled to be survived. Standing atop the tower now, one feels no urge to scan the distance. The land stretches gently outward, unchanged by the absence of eyes. The sky does not react. The world continues. Perhaps this was the kingdom's final understanding, that watching forever is not the same as living, that attention can become a burden when it no longer serves. The chapter drifts into reflection. Many civilizations fell because they watched too late. This one chose to stop watching at exactly the right moment. Emotion settles into peaceful melancholy. The listener senses that nothing was lost by looking away. Something was gained instead, a return to presence. As the sun rises higher, light washes the tower evenly. No alarm is sounded, no movement breaks the calm. The day unfolds unobserved. The chapter closes as evening returns. Stars appear above the same horizon, now unwatched once more. The tower remains, silent and dignified, no longer demanding duty. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some horizons do not require watching to remain safe. As sleep approaches, imagine that tower standing quietly. Steps unused, fires cold, eyes rested. A kingdom that learned when to stop looking outward and finally come to rest.
It is said that what is left unnamed can remain whole. The chapter opens inside a stone chamber, where maps lie spread across a long table. Candlelight flickers softly, revealing coastlines, mountains, rivers, everywhere marked with care. And at the center of each map, there is nothing, a wide, untouched space. The opening question arrives gently, without insistence. Why would those who knew how to map the world choose not to fill it? In forgotten corners of the earth, maps were once acts of trust. To draw a place was to invite it into memory, to declare it reachable, explainable. Names anchored land to language, lines promised arrival, but this kingdom learned restraint. The narrative focus settles on the blank spaces, deliberate omissions that appear again and again across generations of maps. Different hands, different inks, different times. The absence remains consistent. No corrections were made, no annotations attempted to explain it away. The blank was intentional. Whispers tell us that early cartographers tried to mark the kingdom once. Each attempt failed, not through error, but through choice. Names were written, then washed away. Lines were drawn, then left unfinished. The parchment itself was allowed to remain clean. Where memory fades, respect can begin. The blank was not ignorance, it was acknowledgement. The mapmakers understood that some places resisted being turned into destinations. To name them would have been to reduce them. To chart them would have been to invite pursuit. So they learned to stop. Emotion moves from curiosity into a quiet unease, softened by reverence. The listener senses the weight of omission, that absence can carry more meaning than detail. The blank space does not feel empty, it feels guarded. Standing before the maps, one feels no urge to fill the center. The surrounding lands seem complete without it. The blank anchors the whole, a stillness around which everything else turns. As myth and memory blur, stories emerge of travelers who followed maps until they reached the edge of the blank and felt no desire to go further. The parchment offered no guidance there, and the body followed suit. Emotion deepens into calm understanding. The listener senses that the kingdom did not vanish by force, it withdrew by refusing to be mapped. Maps elsewhere grew more detailed, empires demanded precision, borders hardened. This blank remained untouched. The chapter drifts into reflection.
Perhaps this was the kingdom's quietest defense, not walls or armies, but absence. Without a name, it could not be summoned. Without lines, it could not be claimed. The blank space protected what lay beneath it. As candlelight dims, the maps are rolled carefully. The blank disappears inside, not erased but preserved. It travels quietly through time, unnoticed by those who seek certainty. Emotion settles into peace. The listener feels permission to leave some things undefined, to resist the urge to label everything encountered. The chapter closes with the maps resting in darkness. The blank remains unseen, intact, and untroubled. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some places remain safest when they are allowed to stay unnamed. As sleep approaches, imagine that blank space on parchment, a quiet refusal to explain, a boundary made of respect, a kingdom protected not by walls, but by silence itself.
It is said that not all departures leave ruins behind. The chapter opens within a stone hall open to the night. There is no roof now, only sky. Wind moves slowly through the arches, lifting dust and setting it down again. The sound is soft, almost like breathing. If one listens carefully, it feels as though something has just passed through. The opening question arrives gently, without urgency. Did the kingdom disappear, or did it go somewhere else? In forgotten corners of the earth, disappearance is often imagined as collapse. Cities fall inward, lives end abruptly. But here, nothing suggests violence. No bodies remain, no graves mark the ground. The city stands empty, not destroyed, listening rather than broken. The narrative focus turns toward the people themselves. If the kingdom did not fall, then where did its people go? Whispers tell us they did not leave together, nor all at once. There was no procession, no final farewell. The city loosened slowly. Families drifted outward along familiar roads. Voices carried stories softly into neighboring lands. Customs dissolved into other traditions without announcing themselves. The kingdom did not migrate as a body, it dispersed as breath. Emotion moves from curiosity into quiet longing. The listener senses lives continuing elsewhere, unmarked, unrecorded, blending into new places without naming their origin. The people carried silence with them, choosing not to explain where they came from. Where memory fades, influence can remain. Some myths suggest that surrounding cultures later adopted unfamiliar songs, gestures, or ways of listening that could not be traced to any known source. They arrived without context, already softened, already incomplete. Perhaps these were the kingdom's final offerings, not monuments, but habits, not names, but ways of being. Standing in the empty city now, one senses that it was not abandoned, it was released. The walls do not feel betrayed. The streets do not feel forgotten. Everything rests as if aware that what mattered most has already moved on. Emotion deepens into acceptance. The listener feels the gentleness of a culture that refused to leave scars behind. They did not announce their departure. They did not insist on remembrance. They trusted that what mattered would travel. As night deepens, stars appear above the open halls. Wind moves through corridors once filled with voices. Now it carries only echoes, not words, but presence. Something intangible remains, even as the people are gone. Perhaps this is how some civilizations endure, not by staying, but by dissolving carefully into the world. The chapter drifts into reflection. History prefers endings that can be recorded, dates, battles, ruins. This kingdom offered none of those. It left no clear moment to mark, no catastrophe to study, only absence. Emotion settles into peaceful melancholy. The listener senses that something rare occurred here, a culture that chose to survive invisibly, carried forward in small, untraceable ways. The city does not mourn its emptiness, it holds it gently. Stone listens. Wind remembers nothing specific, yet carries something forward. The chapter closes as mist settles fully into the streets. The last echoes dissolve. Stars remain unchanged. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some kingdoms do not end. They spread quietly into the world, leaving behind silence instead of ruins. As sleep approaches, imagine those voices moving outward, soft, unannounced, unclaimed, carrying a kingdom not in name, but in the way they walked, the way they listened, and the way they chose to disappear without harm. It is said that the sky remembers nothing, and yet forgets nothing either. The chapter opens upward, where the vanished kingdom has already begun to dissolve into darkness. The outlines of stone walls and fallen pillars remain faintly visible below, but the true presence above them is the sky, vast, steady, and filled with stars that have watched longer than any human memory. The opening question drifts gently into the night. What remains when even remembrance fades? In forgotten corners of the earth, people once believed the stars were witnesses.
they lifted their eyes and felt seen. They traced patterns overhead and trusted that what endured above would anchor what changed below. The kingdom that vanished did the same. The narrative focus settles on the stars themselves, not as guides or omens, but as quiet continuities. Long before the city was built, they were there. Long after its silence settled, they remained. Stones were raised beneath them. Streets were aligned to their rising. Gates were closed under their watch. And then, one by one, the human rhythms ceased. The stars did not react. Emotion moves from curiosity into awe. The listener senses the vastness of time that holds civilizations lightly. The sky does not mourn. It does not celebrate. It simply continues. Where memory fades, presence endures. Generations once gathered beneath these same constellations, naming them, tracing stories between points of light. Those names have faded now, the stories dissolved, but the stars remain in their patient arrangement, unconcerned with being understood. The city below grew quiet. Roofs collapsed inward, walls softened, dust settled, and above it all, the heavens remained unchanged. Emotion deepens into peaceful insignificance. The listener feels the comfort of being small within something enduring. The loss of the kingdom feels less like tragedy, more like completion within a larger rhythm. Standing among the ruins at night, one does not feel abandoned. The stars still offer light. They offer no answers, but they do not withdraw. Perhaps this was the final lesson the kingdom accepted, that permanence was never theirs to claim. That to be witnessed by the sky was enough, even if the sky did not remember names. The chapter drifts into reflection. History records what changes. The stars embody what does not. Between them, human stories rise briefly, then settle. The kingdom did not need to be remembered to have mattered. As night deepens, constellations shift slowly, almost imperceptibly. The same sky seen by the first builders now arches over empty streets. Time passes without emphasis. Emotion settles into calm surrender. The listener senses release from the burden of legacy. To exist fully for a time, then dissolve, is not failure. It is alignment. The chapter closes as dawn approaches. Stars begin to thin, not in haste, but gently. Light returns to the ruins below, revealing nothing new. The city rests as it has learned to rest. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And some histories are complete, not because they are remembered, but because they were once lived beneath an enduring sky. As sleep approaches, imagine those stars continuing, steady, indifferent, kind, outlasting memory, holding the place where a kingdom once was, without needing to recall its name.
It is said that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of completion. The chapter opens beneath a moon that casts its light without intention. Ruins rest quietly below, stones softened by centuries of wind, walls reduced to gentle outlines, streets no longer asking to be walked. There is no single structure left to command attention. Everything blends into the land as if it has always belonged here. The opening question arrives softly, without urgency or demand. What remains when silence is chosen? In forgotten corners of the earth, civilizations often leave behind declarations, monuments, inscriptions, warnings to the future. This kingdom chose otherwise. It did not announce its ending. It did not carve its reasons into stone. It allowed silence to speak on its behalf. The narrative focus settles on what is still present, not objects but atmosphere. A sense of rest permeates the space. The ruins do not feel abandoned. They feel concluded. Stone no longer resists time. It cooperates with it. Where memory fades, peace can remain. The kingdom once shaped its world carefully. Gates closed gently. Temples lowered their voices. Water withdrew. Maps learned to stay blank. Even the people carried their presence elsewhere without leaving wounds behind. Each choice pointed toward the same understanding, that absence could be intentional.
Emotion moves from reflection into calm reverence. The listener senses that nothing here is unfinished. There is no unanswered cry embedded in the ruins, no demand for rediscovery. Silence was not forced upon this place, it was invited. Standing among the remains, one feels no urge to reconstruct what was lost. The imagination does not race, the mind slows. The land seems to ask for nothing except to be left undisturbed. The chapter deepens into contemplation. Modern eyes often mistake silence for erasure, but here, silence feels full. It holds memory without insisting upon it. It carries meaning without explanation. Perhaps this was the kingdom's final wisdom, that to be remembered forever is not the same as being complete, that some stories end best when they are allowed to rest. Emotion settles into deep calm. The listener senses permission to let go of the need to understand everything, to trace every origin, to recover every fragment. The world does not unravel when some things remain unsaid. As night deepens, the ruins blend further into shadow. Stars rise overhead, steady and unconcerned. The silence does not thicken, it simply remains. Nothing here waits to be found. Nothing here is lost. The chapter closes without instruction or conclusion. The land breathes quietly. The moon moves on. The silence holds. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some endings matter most when they are allowed to be quiet. As sleep approaches, let the stillness settle around you, a place where nothing needs to be named, nothing needs to return, and silence itself is enough.
It is said that even cities grow tired. The final chapter opens as twilight settles gently over the land. The last outlines of stone are barely visible now, walls softened into curves, streets reduced to suggestions beneath the sand. Wind moves across the dunes in slow, careful patterns, as if mindful of what rests below. The opening question arrives like a lullaby whispered by the earth itself. Can a kingdom choose to sleep? In forgotten corners of the world, endings are often imagined as collapse or conquest. Empires fall, capitals burn, names are erased by force. But here, nothing fell, nothing broke. The kingdom simply lowered itself into rest. The narrative focus gathers everything that came before: the gates that closed without sound, the water that learned to hide, the library that chose forgetting, the watchtowers left unwatched, the maps that remained blank, the people who carried their voices elsewhere, the stars that outlasted memory. Each choice was a preparation, not for survival, but for sleep. Where memory fades, rest can begin. The land seems to understand this. Sand does not rush. It settles patiently, grain by grain, covering stone without pressure. What was built returns gently to the earth, not erased, but cradled. Emotion moves from reflection into deep peace. The listener senses that nothing has been lost. Everything necessary has already been released. The kingdom does not resist being forgotten. It welcomes it. Standing here now, one feels no grief. The absence is not hollow. It is full, of completion, of trust, of cycles allowed to finish. The kingdom did not ask to be remembered. It asked only to be left undisturbed. The chapter deepens into quiet acceptance. Modern minds cling to permanence. They fear disappearance. This place teaches another way, that to end softly is not to fail, and that rest is not the opposite of life. As night deepens, stars emerge above the dunes. They shine as they always have, indifferent yet gentle. Beneath them, the city settles fully into the ground, its outlines now part of the land's own breathing. Perhaps this was the kingdom's final wisdom, that nothing needs to endure forever to have been meaningful, that even stone deserves rest, that silence is not emptiness, but sleep. Emotion settles into profound calm. The listener feels the invitation not to search, not to uncover, not to remember, but to let go, to allow what has completed its purpose to remain undisturbed. By morning, there will be no visible sign that a city ever stood here. Travelers will cross the dunes unaware. Wind will reshape the surface again and again. Beneath it all, the kingdom will remain intact, untouched by curiosity or time. The chapter closes without final words. There is nothing left to explain. The land breathes evenly. The sky turns slowly. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some histories end not with silence, but with rest. As sleep approaches, imagine that kingdom beneath the sand, complete, untroubled, and whole, having laid itself gently into the earth, and finally learned how to sleep.